to the historic Ocean House, a luxurious hotel that pays homage to New England's golden age of hospitality, with timeless elegance and renewed civility. This treasured resort is the setting of our special broadcast of the Ocean House Author Series, each program featuring nationally best-selling and award-winning authors in a salon-style conversation, hosted by Ocean House owner, actress, and best-selling author Deborah Goodrich Royce. WCRI is pleased to partner with the Ocean House to present this ongoing series, which brings you the best and the brightest of the literary world. Now, let's take you to the Ocean House.
This evening, we are honored to welcome Marie Benedict to talk about her latest book, Daughter of Egypt. Marie Benedict is the New York Times and USA Today best-selling author of The Queens of Crime, The Mitford Affair, Her Hidden Genius, The Mystery of Mrs. Christie, The Only Woman in the Room, Lady Clementine, Carnegie's Maid, The Other Einstein, and with Victoria Christopher Murray, the Good Morning America Book Club pick, The Personal Librarian, and the Target Book of the Year, The First Ladies. All of her books have been translated into multiple languages, and many have been selected for the Barnes & Noble Book Club, Target Book Club, Costco Book Club, Indie Next List, and LibraryReads List. She lives in Pittsburgh with her family. Marie will be in conversation this evening with best-selling author and Ocean House Author Series host Deborah Goodrich Royce. Deborah's latest book, Best Boy, was an instant indie press bestseller, and Reef Road, a national bestseller, was named one of the best books of 2023 by Kirkus Reviews. She began as an actress on All My Children and in multiple films before transitioning to the role of story editor at Miramax Films. With her husband Chuck, Deborah restored the Avon Theater, Ocean House Hotel, Deer Mountain Inn, United Theater, and Martin House Books. And now, without any further ado, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Marie Benedict and Deborah Goodrich Royce.
We have microphones everywhere, loaded. Hi, everybody. It's so good to be here. We've both been traveling.
We have. First of all, I just want to say thank you to Deborah for coming out in conversation with me during her own book tour.
We have towels.
This woman has done a luncheon today. She has a podcast to do after this, and she squeezed me in, and I could not be more grateful.
Well, I couldn't be happier because I love this book. You are so lucky. You are going to love this book. But I want to know, why do we have towels? Is something going to happen here tonight?
Is there going to be a water fight? I don't know. Something is going on. Dabbing at our foreheads, perhaps? Hopefully not.
Delicate and contained. I'm so glad to see you. Thank you for coming here.
Thank you. Well, when we last saw each other, it was in my hometown. In Pittsburgh, where we were launching your latest book, which, by the way, if you have not picked it up, if you haven't read it yet, you absolutely have to. It is such a great, twisty thriller, but also has such rich, deep issues about memory and second-guessing ourselves and others. And I literally, it was such a page-turner, I couldn't put it down.
So I paid Marie to do that.
Yes,
so
it's a paid advertisement.
But now,
no, it's not. It's fantastic.
Not another word about me.
No.
I want you to start by, how would you describe your latest novel, Daughter of Egypt?
So Daughter of Egypt, okay, when our book opens, Lady Evelyn Herbert of Highclere Castle, and if you know that that's actually Downton Abbey, right? That's the real life Downton Abbey. Did that get a little clap? I love that for somebody who did that. And Lady Evelyn Herbert is about to embark on a trip to Egypt with her father, Lord Carnarvon, and the archaeologist Howard Carter, who was basically her tutor in all things ancient Egypt. And in Evelyn's mind, she's on the hunt for the tomb of one of the only female pharaohs, Hatshepsut. But along the way, and we can talk about this, they make the largest archaeological discovery of all time. And it's an amazing moment. It's a pivotal moment in history, this particular discovery. But it isn't what Evelyn set out to find. She wanted to find this tomb to really unearth some of the history of this incredible pharaoh and the mystery surrounding her erasure, which we can talk about too.
So I've read you talk about the King Tut mania of the 1970s, which who else was really affected by that? I was affected by it. My mom died a couple years ago. I can't even tell you how many King Tut books she had and objects.
Girl.
Absolutely. My Pittsburgh mother. So you speak about it in your life. I'd like you to talk a little bit about that thing. So there was Egyptomania in the 20s, but then in the 1970s, really when this show went on the road, will you speak a bit about that?
Yeah, I'd love to, because that is actually what began, what sparked this obsession, this long time obsession with ancient Egypt. So I wasn't fortunate enough to attend that. Did anyone here see this incredible tour that you saw it?
We went to Toronto to see it.
Come on, you did not.
We did.
I would have killed to see that at that time. In the 1970s, all the treasures from Tutankhamun's tomb, or most of them, traveled around the world, and it created this absolute obsession with ancient Egypt, with Tutankhamun, with excavation. And I was not fortunate enough to go, but my goodness, it was everywhere in the news. And I think that when I look back on my life, I really think that was the moment that my fascination with ancient Egypt really began. I mean, I was young at that time. And over the years, it never really went away. I would always, stop in whatever city I lived in or I was traveling. I'd always go and see whatever that particular museum's collection of ancient Egyptian artifacts was. And later, when before I was a writer, I was a disgruntled New York City lawyer. Okay, and anyone can ask about that, and I will talk you out of being a lawyer yourself if need be. Thank you for clapping, whoever did that. So in any event, when I was, a disgruntled New York City lawyer, I was still always kind of researching, thinking about a different path. History had always been my passion. And it was during that time that I came across Hatshepsut. She was not only one of the only female pharaohs ever, there's maybe 3, she was incredibly successful. She had one of the most prosperous, peaceable reigns in all of ancient Egypt. She, more than most male pharaohs, and she did it she did a lot of it with diplomacy, not so much utilizing her military. And in the years after her reign, after her death, an army basically was ordered to go around to all these incredible monuments that she had crafted, obelisks, mortuary temple, chapels, and remove all trace of her. And I don't mean that in some random metaphorical sense. I mean that quite literally, with a chisel, taking out her name, taking out her likeness. So many of these monuments and reliefs still exist, and you can see everybody, but for Hatshepsut, because the chisel marks are there. Sometimes her name would be erased, and her accomplishments would be attributed to a different pharaoh. So really, for millennia, she was erased. And it wasn't until much, much later, thankfully for us, that she was rediscovered, and they started the process of rewriting her back into history. And I just realized that was a really long-winded answer to your question about Tut.
Well, no, it wasn't, because I want to drill down a little bit more. So this whole Tut mania in the 20s, and one thing I want to say about movie theaters, old movie theaters. So my husband Chuck and I have gone more than once to something in Utah called the Art House Convergence, which is a gathering of people who are crazy enough to restore old movie theaters. And there are subgroups there, including people who own Egyptian movie theaters. In the 1920s with Egyptomania.
Yes,
this
are
is
you
a
serious?
thing, Egyptian movie theaters. Yeah.
I mean, I knew that, we can talk a little bit more about when Tut's tomb was originally discovered, but Tutmania swept the globe and became a style choice in architecture, clothes, wallpaper, drinks, food, for a really long time. And then it kind of resurfaced in that 1970s time period.
Right.
But I did not realize that there was a subgroup of movie theater owners who had Egyptian.
Trivial Pursuit, everyone.
I love it. You guys are going to win in Trivial Pursuit.
But Hatshepsut, I was not familiar with her. And how did you find out about her? Where did your knowledge come from?
I think, during that decade that I was a disgruntled New York City lawyer, which I often say is 77 years because it's like dog years. If you've been a lawyer, you know what I'm saying. During that 77-year time period, I would sneak off to the cultural institutions in New York City. And one of the places I loved the best was the Metropolitan Museum of Art. If any of you have been there, the Temple of Dendur, where they've transported an entire Egyptian temple, but they actually have one of the best collections of ancient Egyptian artifacts outside of Egypt. And they actually have quite a number of objects related to Hatshepsut. And in the early 2000s, so I knew about those from my time period in New York and visiting the Met. But in the early 2000s, they had an exhibit, a traveling exhibit dedicated solely to her. And I mean, it's no mean feat to actually get and assemble Hatshepsut objects because most of them were destroyed. In this great purge of her name, colossal statues, whole chapels, things were obliterated. So to have all these objects in one place was just magnificent. So I kind of knew about her before that, but I think that really sealed my passion for her. This was almost 20 years ago.
Let's talk about this obliteration and the process of your writing of historical fiction and how you choose to fill in the blanks, what you keep absolutely letter of the law correct. What is your process there?
It's a little different for each woman because so much of it hinges on what's available in terms of original source material, right? And that's really where I like to hang my hat, whether it's letters by or from the woman during the time period, journals, accounts that don't necessarily have somebody else's perspective, but are really from the time or in the woman's own hand and in her own voice. Once I've kind of exhausted that, I will cast my net wider in terms of the research, because you're not going to find everything in her resources, right? So I'll look more widely, macro and micro in terms of the research. I'll look at broader political movements, broader cultural movements, things that would have affected her in her time, and smaller things like, what kind of wallpaper did she have? Did she have King Tut wallpaper? So it really varies. You want to have all those details to not only bring her setting and life to life, but also to understand her as best you can, to really get inside her head and really try and capture her voice. I think of all of that as the architecture of the story. It's the foundation and the pillars and the roof of my story. And it's in those kind of gray, shadowy areas where we don't know the answer, where the historical record can't tell us, or where a historical record would never even go, right? We don't always have people's internal thoughts, for example. That's where the fiction comes in. But it's not, like willy-nilly fiction. I really do try to anchor it in the facts, and it's a logical extrapolation of what we do know, what would be possible during that time period. And also, what's kind of appropriate for the character that I'm creating. Because while my stories are inspired by real women, it is my fictional version of that woman. So it's kind of, and that kind of approach is one that I take for all the women I write about. Now, when you're dealing with somebody who's really, really old, like Hatshepsut, she lived in she was born probably around 1470 BC. So we're talking millennia ago. We don't have some of the stuff you would have today, but you do surprisingly have a wealth of stuff because the ancient Egyptians loved to record things about themselves. For example, we know who her father was. We know about when she was born, her family, because all of these things are memorialized. We know that she was also, in addition to being born, the daughter of a pharaoh. Her father was Moses the first. She was also a high priestess. She was the highest priestess in the land. She was considered the god's wife of Amun. And because it's captured in a relief, right, a carved stone relief, we know what it meant to engage in the mourning ritual necessary to be this high priestess. It was her job every morning before dawn to get up and engage in this multi-hour ritual to basically plead with the god Amun to make the sun rise. So she started this as like a preteen, right? And so something like that really gives you an insight into who she was, what responsibilities she had, what she felt like she was carrying on her shoulders, how strong she had to be to do that and to bear that responsibility for her people. So when sometimes the information that you have for someone as ancient as Hatshepsut is very different than the sort of stuff that we have today, but there's so much you can glean from it about her character, about what her day-to-day life was like. She lived in a highly ritualized society. And in her level, her royal level, almost every aspect of her life was prescribed by ritual. And so it tells you a lot about who she is, who she was, and what the arc of her life might have been like.
So let's talk about the dual narrative. You have chosen two women, this female pharaoh and this English woman, Lady Evelyn, who is interested in her. Talk about your way into telling the story through those two voices rather than just one. And then I also want you to talk a little bit about calling it daughter, singular, of Egypt, which it kept me going back to the title because it's really about two women who are very much affected and influenced by Egypt. So talk about all that.
Yeah, so Lady Evelyn. So, you can tell I had an obsession with Hatshepsut. So for a long time, you kind of know how I came to find her, and I was collecting information about her for a long time. And to your question about two voices, usually the books that I write are one woman's perspective. I go deep into one woman's life. And I write my stories in the first person, so I'm really looking at the world through one character's eyes. But there were things about Hatshepsut's existence that would be lost if I only told her perspective from her life. And so I was hesitant for a long time, even though I've known about Hatshepsut and she's been on my to write list for a really long time, for decades. And I was kind of poking around. I love the age of late 1800s into the early 1900s age of archaeology. It's when a lot of the big discoveries were made. It's a problematic time period because it's really colonial archaeology. But there's a lot of really interesting aspects about it. And as I was kind of poking around in there, I was looking for people who had investigated Hatshepsut to see if looking at her life through an archaeologist's eyes might be intriguing. And when I did that, I learned that the archaeologist Howard Carter, who's now famous, and we can talk about why, he was one of the first people, when he arrived in Egypt as a young man, he was a teenager when he first started working in Egypt. His first job was actually to sketch all the reliefs in Hatshepsut's mortuary temple. This structure is vast. It's built into the side of a cliff. It is considered one of the architectural wonders of the world. It is absolutely magnificent. And so he became intimately familiar with Hatshepsut's life by sketching all of these reliefs, because that's what these reliefs do. They tell the story of her life and her accomplishments. He then went on to kind of pursue her, and he actually found a cliff tomb, so a tomb that was literally like you had to hang by a bunch of ropes and slide into it in the middle of a cliff, which was an early burial place for her when she was still a princess. So he was very familiar with Hatshepsut. And when I learned that his patron was Lord Carnarvon, that meant that they spent the digging season together in Egypt, and he spent the summers at Highclere Castle because it was too hot to dig in Egypt in the summer, and that he tutored Lady Evelyn. So he taught her all there was to know about ancient Egypt. He taught her a wealth of information about archaeological techniques, and I knew that she had a passion for archaeology. I wondered, what if she grew to love Hatshepsut like I love Hatshepsut through Howard Carter? And what if the two of them set out to find her tomb as part of these excavations that they were doing?
And the two women, so one is a pharaoh, so she's ostensibly very powerful, but as you said, her life is completely prescribed. And the other is a woman of her time in early 20th century traditional English high society. So I think you very beautifully illustrate the freedom and lack of freedom each woman has. Will you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, when you look at these two women, one of the things that attracted me about writing the story from both of their perspectives is when you think about them, an Egyptian pharaoh and an aristocratic English woman from the 1920s, you're thinking they have no overlap, right? Like, how different are their lives? But in fact, they had so many similarities, and so many similarities that I actually think women today can relate to. Maybe not, like, we don't have to get up before dawn and wake up the god so the sun rises, obviously, but
I don't know.
Well, some of us do. Some of us, the moon and sun set on. But, both of them were trying to do something that went outside the norm of what was accepted for women at that time. In Hatshepsut's time, there were no models for being a pharaoh. That was, who could be a pharaoh was very narrowly prescribed. It was somebody of the royal blood, a man, certain levels. You had to be divinely chosen. All this rite and ritual went around it. So for a woman to actually ascend into that role was unheard of. And so she had to very craftily find a way to do that when she found herself in the position of being the best person for the job. She really was. She had been trained really to do this. And similarly, Lady Evelyn, she wasn't supposed to be an archaeologist. At the time the book opens, she's really at a crossroads. Her mother, Lady Almina, who is the daughter of a Rothschild, and this is important, not because it's scandalous, but because it's important for the story, she was the illegitimate daughter of a Rothschild, which meant that it had been difficult for her family to find her husband. And one of the reasons that Lord Carnarvon agreed to marry her, he had the title, he had the estate, he had the lineage, but he was a gambler with huge debts. And her father would settle those debts and land her with an enormous sum. So for her mother, finding a husband was, it was very important in that society for those women anyway, but there was this extra pressure coming from Lady Almina because of what she had gone through. And so this is the time period when Lady Evelyn is supposed to be out in society. Society's been launched back in the years after the Great War. She wants her out there making the best match possible. And her daughter, instead, wants to run off to Egypt and in the dirt and the dust dig out mummies. You can imagine what her reaction was to that. They did strike a deal eventually, but, Evelyn was really up against that push-pull of society and what was expected for a woman of her level, her strata in society at that time. So these women, although, their lives were very different in many ways, they did share this very powerful similarity, and that kind of runs through the book.
We'll take a short break and be back with the Ocean House Author Series here on WCRI.
The days are lengthening, but the coastal chill still lingers. The perfect excuse to curl up with a captivating new story. Whether for yourself or the reader in your life, discover the latest work from hotelier and nationally best-selling author Deborah Goodrich Royce. Her newest psychological thriller, Best Boy, is a taut, gripping exploration of identity, memory, and the dangerous power of forgetting. Join Deborah at the United Theater on Sunday, April 12th at 4 p.m. for an intimate author talk and book signing. Your ticket includes a copy of this new must-read release. For tickets and details, visit unitedtheater.org. Spend your Sunday afternoon with a master of suspense.
we're back with the Ocean House Authors Series on WCRI.
So Hatshepsut, you spoke about how she has to be crafty and clever to get what she wants. Illustrate a little bit this world she's living in. Each person is, her brother, her cousin, her father, they're all multiple roles that they have to each other. It's very incestuous.
Yes, let's just say they married siblings. It's gross, it's icky, we know. And that's like a big part of this story. She was the daughter of a pharaoh. All of her brothers died early. Her mother was the high queen. And before her father died, it was decided that she should marry her half-brother, her father's son by a different, really his concubine. It wasn't one of the queens. And this match was made, and then her father dies. And this son becomes Thutmose II. He becomes a pharaoh. But he's young. He has not been raised alongside her father the way that Hatshepsut has. And Hatshepsut, don't forget, she's a priestess. And along with that comes property. That she has not just a staff. I mean, she has powerful priests that report to her. She has people that she has to support. She has learned how to govern in this role and at her father's side. Thutmose II, it's pretty weak. And so even during his lifetime, she's guiding him, mentoring him, and then he dies really young. And now we're at a crossroads. She's the queen. She and Thutmose II have a daughter. So yes, it's not a ceremonial marriage. I know that's really gross, but it's not. And there's a question of who's going to be next. There is no male heir that's really the right one. So they again have to go to Thutmose, her half-brother and husband's child by another wife. And this infant becomes Thutmose III. And she stays queen, and she becomes co-regent, co-ruler with an infant. And she's a born ruler. She knows how to rule. And so bit by bit, it becomes clear that she really has to step into the role or the bad things are going to happen. And she's so crafty in the way she did it. And this is one of the things that I fell in love with about Hatshepsut, because you could see it in the museums. So iconography, symbolism, is super powerful in ancient Egypt. I mean, it is today, but it was really powerful in ancient Egypt. And it was very prescribed. Certain objects meant certain things, went with certain people. Pharaohs had certain objects that only they could be depicted with, right? So as Hatshepsut is positioning herself to go from co-regent maybe to co-pharaoh, she knows it's going to be a hard sell for the people, right? And look at it like almost as like, I don't want to call it propaganda, but it's almost like that. Like she's putting out images in public spaces that show her in a certain way so that people will accept her. Her first images, statues and reliefs, are of her wearing the Nemes headdress, which if you've ever seen it, it's a striped linen headdress that only the pharaoh can wear. But she looks otherwise just like a woman, regular woman. A little bit later, we start to see Hatshepsut. She's starting to adopt more of the objects. She's holding a crook, which is a symbol of power. She's not just wearing the Nemes headdress, which was more informal. She's wearing one of the more formal crowns, right? As the years go on, she starts to shed her feminine image, not because she wants the people to think that she's a man. They know she's a woman. She wants them to know that she's mother and father to the people of Egypt, and that she can rule them as well as any man. She starts to look like a man in her images. She starts to adopt all the trappings of a pharaoh. And she went on to have this hugely successful rule because she was so good at what she did.
So let's talk about erasing her from history. And there were thoughts that there was something really bad about her and that's why it happened, that she did something wrong. Or talk about scholarship in that arena and how that's come along.
It's fascinating, and it's actually one of the reasons that I was drawn to this 1920s archaeology period as a parallel story. Archaeologists, first of all, Hatshepsut was lost for millennia because she'd been erased, right? She'd been chiseled out. It wasn't until hieroglyphics were translated, when they found the Rosetta Stone in the 1800s, that archaeologists and scholars started to be able to translate these little tiny images that were left on her monuments, like one tiny cartouche, which is like a signature. And they started to piece together the fact that Hatshepsut had been around and that all these accomplishments were actually hers. They weren't like Thutmose III or some other pharaoh. And that started to happen late 1800s, early 1900s. And when the early archaeologists started to realize that, they started to publish, and I do reference one of them in the book, which is a real article. I think it's the Metropolitan Museum of Art archaeologist from the time wrote a now famous article saying, Hatshepsut must have been a horrible shrew. She must have been wanting to illegally usurp the throne from the more worthy, Thutmose III or whoever it was, because, why else would somebody be so violent in their destruction of her? It must have been, as you said, her fault. Her fault. And I thought, that's interesting, right? Because isn't that a refrain that we hear all throughout history, right? If a woman rises up, she becomes labeled as something else. And it's only, actually, there was a big article in the New York Times last Tuesday about this very topic. Wicked Stepmother No More was the title of the article.
I got so excited when I saw
Could you believe that?
Oh my God.
I know, I literally, because the scholarship, the archaeology, all the data since, really the 70s and 80s has shown that she was no shrew. She was going up against what was acceptable, but she was doing it all for the good of her people. And when these archaeologists from the 1920s were looking at Hatshepsut through their lens, they were seeing a shrew. They were seeing a usurper. They were seeing the wicked stepmother. And it's only now that we can look back, and that's really what I try to do in the book, is show you who she probably really was, right? And take the scholarship and the research that we have now to put together, and again, I write fiction, so I have a lot of liberties, and string together a story to show you no wicked stepmother, a woman who was harnessing the power of iconography to rise up and become the pharaoh that her people needed at a time when there were really not a lot of other contenders.
What you're talking about, when I was reading it, it reminded me ever so slightly of The Wizard of Oz, the way that it's told in that story, that it really is a man kind of behind a screen creating this symbolic figure that the citizens of Oz can respect.
Okay, I'm going to steal that because that's a perfect way to describe it. That's exactly it, right? It's the man behind the screen telling you what you're looking at, right? But if you were in ancient Egypt, you might not be looking at it that way. You might have been, she had to make her argument, but look at what happened. I mean, she reigned for decades. There was no uprising. There was no scratching her out right there and then. She ruled peaceably for a really long time and had an amazing, amazing run. So when you kind of put, that's kind of what I mean about the architecture of the story, of the research. It's when you put together the arc of those facts, the real stories, at least my real story, right? The real story starts to shine through. But I loved juxtaposing that against what the archaeologists of the time would have said about her, and making Lady Evelyn the one who wants to change the way people think.
So speaking of juxtaposing, I want to talk about process. So two completely different timelines, storylines, with obvious reasons that they overlap. What is your process for writing them and for researching them? What's your timeline on this book? Talk about the whole thing.
Well, timeline is kind of crazy because I feel like Hatshepsut's story has been like building up for decades. I literally, when I decided this was the story I was going to tell, and I started to assemble all my research, I was pulling out like newspaper articles from the 1990s because we didn't have the internet, right? I had to keep the newspaper article. Museum publications from some of these incredible exhibits of her work, pictures I had taken a long time ago. So by the time I started to write Hatshepsut's story, I had a lot of information assembled. I did have to get up to date. I read a lot of, scholarly articles about the latest, and I also had the great pleasure of working with an Egyptologist. I worked with Dr. J.J. Shirley, who is, she's a professor, she's the editor of the Journal of Ancient Egypt, and she also runs an excavation 3 to 6 months out of the year in the Valley of the Noble. So she not only knew archaeology, she knew historical archaeology, and her specialty was New Kingdom and Hatshepsut. So I was like, sign me up for her. So when I was putting together the story, she came on board when, I wouldn't say it was all written, but it was mapped out and a lot of the drafting had been done. There were so many points at which, when you're dealing with something that old, there are a lot of things that you will absolutely never know for sure. And what Dr. Shirley really allowed me to do was she looked at my options, kind of the pathways I was considering, and said, we will never know. This is an area for debate among scholars, but these 1 or 2 or 3 options are all possible. And it gave me the courage to kind of dive in a society and in a time period that's so very different and foreign from our own, right? And she made me feel comfortable about some of this stuff. And with Lady Evelyn, that was newer. I had always been fascinated by this historical era of archaeology, and so I knew something about it. And I don't think it's a spoiler for me to say, I knew a lot about, I thought I knew a lot about Tutankhamun, because his excavation and his treasures are what really brought me to ancient Egypt in the first place. But the great discovery that Lady Evelyn and Howard Carter and Lord Carnarvon make is the tomb of Tutankhamun. And what I learned as I was going into the minutia of it, and there I really drew on, like, Howard Carter had published many books and articles about the day-to-day. We have all of his letters and records, which are accessible, so I used those quite a lot. But very infrequently was Lady Evelyn mentioned. And when I first looked at that history, she was nowhere, absolutely nowhere.
So the discovery of that tomb, you speak in the book, and it is known that there was tomb vandalism that had been going on throughout time. Yeah. So the magnitude of the discovery of Tut's tomb and what it contained, it had a lot of stuff in it.
Oh, more than anything that had ever been found before. What was crazy about, well, a couple things. There were a lot of crazy things about it. First, that they had been looking for years. Lady Evelyn and Howard Carter were out to find Hatshepsut, but stumbling across the largest archaeological discovery of all time, nobody was going to say no to that, right? They were pretty thrilled. But it was a very odd discovery. First of all, Tutankhamun wasn't a major pharaoh. He's referred to as the boy king for a reason. He became a pharaoh when he was very young. He died very young. He did not have like a whole host of accomplishments. And his tomb, if anyone's ever been to Egypt, most tombs are humongous. They're corridors and hallways and chambers and antechambers, and they're lavishly and gorgeously decorated. Even if you find nothing inside them, it's amazing to find one, right? Because they offer so much information, and they're just really beautiful. When they first went into, and Lady Evelyn was right there when they first went in the tomb, still had a...
You write that all so beautifully. I have to commend you. Very gripping, the way you wrote it. But go on.
Well, thank you. That means a lot coming from you, because you are the queen of gripping. Thank you. And that's a compliment. When they opened the tomb, it still has a seal on it. Now, query about that because there was a little bit of raiding there, but they really weren't supposed to go inside. You're only supposed to enter the tomb with government officials, so they were very naughty. But here they are, they've been waiting for years. They do go in, down these famous stairs, into this antechamber. Now, I've been there, I've seen it. It's small. I mean, it doesn't look like any of the other tombs I've seen. It was piled to the brim with 600 gilded objects, canopies, beds, carriages. I mean, you can't believe the stuff that they got in this tiny space. And when they got in there, knowing what they knew about how most tombs were constructed, I mean, even knowing what I know, you know that's not all, that there's got to be something else. And where's the coffin, right? Where's the sarcophagus? And it was Evelyn who kind of guided them towards a spot that she thought looked promising. She had them carve out, and this is all on the first night, carve out a little place because you couldn't disturb it too much because first of all they had to make it look like it was undisturbed, and you could really upset the structure of the tomb if you dug too much. So Evelyn was very small. She was very petite, tiny person. They carved out a tiny little sliver for her, and she crawled into the burial chamber. And that's where the famous gold shrine is, the famous gold sarcophagi, the nesting ones, and the famous gold mask of Tutankhamun. And, it was really, it is an amazing moment in history for many reasons. But, going back and getting to look at that, experiencing that event, which I had thought about myself many times, through Evelyn's eyes, it was so exciting.
Curse, no curse.
No curse.
Aww.
I know. Her father died of an infected mosquito bite. He really did. I mean, there were some other deaths as well, and that's, unfortunate. But I can definitely tell you the one that was labeled the most cursed was the father. And he was a really ill man. I think I mentioned to you that he was a gambling man. And, actually, archaeology was probably his biggest gamble. I mean, we don't think about archaeology that way today, but it was like the Wild West. If you had money, you could buy a commission. You didn't have to be an archaeologist. You could do a dig. And it was partage. It was 50-50. You split the spoils with the Egyptian government. So he loved those digs. He's like, what am I going to find? What am I going to come away with? But he also he was one of the first people to own a car in England, and he loved to race cars. Now, when I say that, he went 25 miles an hour. That was about as far as, but he was in multiple car accidents. His health was not strong as a result of all those accidents. And when, in the days after they discovered the tomb, he got a mosquito bite. It got infected. It was before antibiotics. And that kind of combined with his pre-existing injuries, that's what he died from.
Well, it even made its way into my book, Best Boy. The kid, the 10-year-old son.
Do you love how worlds collide?
The woman does a report on King Tut. And anyway.
I mean, seriously, right?
It all there. So how do you write a book like this? Do you write all one woman, all the other woman, put it together? Do you go back and forth in the writing, like one computer to another computer? How do you do it?
I had to write them separately. And the reason for that was Hatshepsut's headspace, her voice is very, very different from Evelyn. And I kind of tried it the other way first, alternating, because I had a very detailed outline. I knew how the sections were going to alternate. But I found that if I shifted away from her headspace, her voice, it was very hard to conjure it back up. And so I wrote all of Hatshepsut at one time first. And then I wrote Evelyn. And I knew kind of the beats where their stories would be interwoven. But always when you do it that way, there's a lot of finessing that goes on. I mean, because you've written many stories that have this, even if it's the same character, it's different time periods, it's different perspectives. And how do you do it?
I write it as you read it. I write it in the order you read it. I don't know.
I could never do that.
But
never.
Well, yours does flow seamlessly. There is a logic to when you transition and a sense to it. So you clearly planned it out. Was one woman easier or harder to write?
Evelyn, her voice and her head were easier for sure, because I've written several books set in that interwar time period in England. And I'm not saying that one woman from a time period is just like any other woman, but I've written several books about women in this really crucial time period, 1920s, 1930s, aristocratic women. So while each of their kind of voices are different, their interior thoughts, I knew quite a bit about the sorts of things that would impact them and affect them, the pressures they had, the things that were happening during their days, the kinds of rituals they had to engage in. So that was a little bit easier to access. Hatshepsut was really a leap, and that's really where I felt so fortunate in my relationship with Dr. Shirley, because that took more courage to make that leap.
Well, I love that you said she told you, like, these three things are possibilities. So she wasn't telling you it was absolutely this or that, but maybe if you had a fourth thing that was just not even within the realm of possibility, you would have known that. I mean, you don't have her opening a McDonald's franchise or something, which is obviously impossible.
But there are, like when you're writing historical fiction and when you're reading historical fiction, the wrong thing will take you out of the story. That suspension of disbelief that you're in this historical time period, if it smacks of anachronism or like it just doesn't, the language doesn't feel right, all of those things will remove you as a reader from the story. And I'm so cognizant of that. And doing that with Hatshepsut, really having Dr. Shirley be there to say, it's okay. You can have her wear this outfit or make this action, or that's probably a little too overkill in the formality, because she was a real person who lived in a ritualistic time, but she was still a real person.
It's so helpful. I was reading a very young novelist book a couple of years ago, and I'm going to venture that this young novelist had a young editor because she was writing a scene in the 1960s, and she had a dentist slip on latex gloves.
Okay.
And I thought, oh, that didn't happen then.
No.
So the writer didn't know, but the editor obviously didn't know either. So
that's scary right there.
Yeah.
We'll take a short break and be back with the Ocean House Author Series here on WCRI.
The days are lengthening, but the coastal chill still lingers, the perfect excuse to curl up with a captivating new story. Whether for yourself or the reader in your life, discover the latest work from hotelier and nationally best-selling author Deborah Goodrich Royce. Her newest psychological thriller, Best Boy, is a taut, gripping exploration of identity, memory, and the dangerous power of forgetting. Join Deborah at the United Theater on Sunday, April 12th at 4 p.m. for an intimate author talk and book signing. Your ticket includes a copy of this new must-read release. For tickets and details, visit unitedtheater.org. Spend your Sunday afternoon with a master of suspense.
And we're back with the Ocean House Author Series on WCRI.
I think I could go on and on, but I think you all probably have questions.
I
right?
love talking to Deborah. Sorry, guys.
I know. I think we have to get. Well, one thing while you're going around with the mic, I do want to ask you: is there what would you like readers to take away from this book more than anything?
Can I say two things? Yeah. Okay. I mean, first of all, even though this book is two women, a very ancient time period, it does fall squarely within my mission, to really shine the light on the women of the past and realize the nature of their contributions. And so that definitely it's a takeaway for me that I hope people get from every book, that historic women are hiding in plain sight among us. They are responsible for so many things that we take for granted and that we are beholden to. And part of our job is to see them and find them and appreciate them. So that absolutely is still part of it. But there's something that happens in this book that is a little different. And it's an expansion, I think, on themes that I have explored in the past. And that is when they discover Tutankhamun's tomb in the book, it's at a particularly tumultuous time in Egyptian history. The Egyptian government the Egyptian people are trying to secure independence, and they're making headway. And when they find Tutankhamun's tomb with all these amazing treasures, Tutankhamun becomes really a symbol of Egyptian greatness. He becomes, and the Egyptian people, one of the first things their government does is to eliminate partage, and they want to keep all these objects in Egypt as a symbol of their greatness, as a symbol of their independence. And this question of, yes, who do the artifacts of the past belong to? Right, that's one. That one has kind of worked its way into my books before, but never before in such a very bold way. But also the issue of who deserves to tell the past, who deserves to tell that story, right? And I mean that's definitely a theme in all my books, right? Shouldn't these women's stories be told? Shouldn't they have been able to share one of the reasons I feel honor-bound to do what I do is because they never got to tell their stories, right? But it's so profound in this setting at this time. Who should tell Hatshepsut's story? Who should tell ancient Egyptian story? Who should tell Lady Evelyn's story?
And it's one of the things you're all going to love about this book, because you do such a really deft job of setting the social and political climate in Egypt of the time, which was extremely tumultuous because they'd been promised certain levels of independence that weren't really being delivered, and they were very colonized. And you write that very well. You have characters and you fill it out, real historical characters.
Yeah.
Yeah, I loved that part of all of it.
Thank you.
But you also see that it was risky to be there because there were these uprisings.
Yeah, I mean, they had to evacuate on several occasions. I mean, it was both risky to be doing the excavations. It was risky to try and keep the spoils of what you found. But it was also exciting to see. It wasn't a time period I was very familiar with Hatshepsut, and I was fairly familiar with this era in archaeology and in England, but I wasn't as familiar as I should have been with Egypt history at this time period. And so to really understand the magnitude of what was happening here and how it was impacting everybody, and then how it played such a huge role in such a big theme in my work, I really had to understand more about 1920s Egypt.
Well, it's beautifully written. Do we have anything from... Yes?
I was wondering, you said that there was erasure of her. Sorry. How did you find, or did they find evidence of her then, if it was all erased?
So I'll give you an example. So when I was in Egypt, we were exploring with the archaeologists. We were exploring the mortuary temple in Luxor, which is this magnificent structure that Hatshepsut built, and I was shown and there's multiple columns, huge colonnades, colossal statues that look like columns, dozens of them. And at the bottom of one of the columns was a cartouche. Do you guys know what a cartouche is? It's oblong. It's actually somebody's signature, really, or their name. And that cartouche was actually Hatshepsut's. It was the only one on the structure. It did, very small. So the local archaeologists believe that when these teams of people came in to scratch her out, it was an act of rebellion on someone's part to leave a small mark of her, to show people that she had been here, that this was actually her tomb, her structure, not some of these other people's. And it wasn't until hieroglyphics were translated in the 1800s. I mean, people knew that cartouche was there, but they didn't know what it meant or what it was or whose it was. And so it wasn't until the translation of the hieroglyphics that happened that they could look at that and start to say, wait a second, this is not Tutmosis III, this is actually a different person, and who is this person? And that's when the piecing together of her history really began.
So why was she erased?
Well, there are a lot of theories about that, right? And so I had a specific theory based on my own research, based on scholarly articles, based on conversations with the Egyptologist I worked with. And I chose one that I think embodies a couple of the possibilities. I think it's probably the most likely possibility. I play with the timeline for the purposes of the story, but I'm pretty sure, and I can't tell you because it would definitely be a spoiler, I do think that what I've settled on is probably pretty close to the truth. Yeah. And that's just not me, that's an Egyptologist saying it too.
I won't spoil it, but I like what you picked.
Thank you. Thank you. There are other options, but I think it's probably what happened.
I just want to compliment you on getting to the emotions, the services of all these women that you've done behind the men.
Thank you.
Carnegie.
Thank you so much. That's so sweet. Thank you.
Carnegie's Maid, the Personal Librarian, and then the Mitford, the latest one with the Mitford Affair. But, you know, so many years, I was a 1960s, person who came alive in the 1960s, so to speak, after I got married, but he's still here. Anyway.
For the moment. Sorry about that, sir.
It's just wonderful the way you describe every aspect, their role, what they're feeling, what they're thinking, how they can go from the maid to someone else, and of course, Lady Clementine, too, the woman behind.
Thank you. You've read a lot of my
Thanks a lot.
ladies. Thank you so much for saying that. I mean, that really means the world, because that's why I choose fiction instead of nonfiction. Because if I were to write about these women in a nonfiction context, I can't go there. I can't hopefully bring readers along for how they might have felt, what the events of their life meant to them, and what they hoped their legacies would be, And that's really one of the main themes in all my work is, what is our legacy? And whose legacy are we perpetuating, right, with our work? And what do we want future generations, people in our communities to remember us for, and then take the torch and carry forward, right? So thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Hi.
I was wondering what happened in history. Like, I was listening and I said, what happened that the tombs even had to be searched for? Was there like a natural disaster, sand covered, or why was it a race-based everything, like, to find these tombs?
Why was it a quest to find these tombs?
Yeah, why weren't they preserved? Since it's
Okay.
Egypt's culture, wouldn't that be something wonderful that they wouldn't let anyone touch?
Well, that's a great question. So the Egyptians, you probably know this, believed that you had to be buried with everything that you needed for the afterlife. So their tombs, especially if you're a royal, so their tombs contained like either a miniature or a full-sized version of food, transportation, gems, miniatures of servants you'd bring along with you, you name it. So there was great riches within the tombs. And while the pharaohs did their darndest to actually hide the tombs so that people would not plunder the tombs, they weren't always successful. In fact, most of the time they weren't successful. The pyramids of Giza, outside of Cairo, which are, the famous structures, those were actually built to hold tombs. And you can go inside the tombs. You can't do it if you're claustrophobic, they're so narrow. But, and those were plundered not in modern time. Those were plundered in antiquity. What would happen is when Egypt was in a time of economic depression, the people knew there were tombs in there. they would go in and they would plunder the tombs to provide livelihoods for people, right? Now, in the New Kingdom, which is the time period that Hatshepsut is part of her father, Tutmosis I was the first pharaoh in the New Kingdom, came along. He's like, we're not going to do this pyramid thing anymore where everyone can see where my tomb is, right? We're going to go out to this desert land, at the beginning of the Sahara. It's called the Valley of the Kings. Mm-hmm. And we're going to bury our tombs in cliffs, in the ground, so nobody can find them. We're going to have these elaborate structures underneath the earth or inside the cliffs, and then we're going to cover the entrance so nobody plunders them. Well, that didn't last forever either. Again, when times are tough, people, they go looking. And the people who worked on these tombs very often lived in the vicinities where they were buried. And so the location of these tombs was passed within families. And when the time was right, they went in and they dug them up.
Thank you.
And so that's why they're hard to find, but that's why they're so coveted.
Okay, thank you so much.
I have a quick question while we're waiting for the next person. Do you personally think there are any more discoveries to be made in Egypt?
So I was actually I just did an event with my Egyptologist last week, and we were talking about this. So she thinks there might be a couple in the Valley of the Kings, okay? Maybe partially disturbed, maybe fully undisturbed. But where more recent attention has been focused in Egyptian archaeology is in two other areas. The Valley of the Nobles, which sits right next to the Valley of the Kings, and that's where the next tier down in aristocracy was buried. These people were, maybe they weren't pharaohs or in the pharaoh's family, but maybe they were a mother, or maybe they were a scribe or a high-level person. And some of their tombs can be very, they're not going to be at the level of a pharaoh, but they do have, incredible objects inside. But what the focus really is now is scholarship. Like, what can we learn about ancient Egyptian society and culture, not just the riches, but also the information about how everybody in society lived? Because in the pharaoh's tombs, it's just about how they lived, right? And then there's a renewed focus on tombs for the next class. And there are whole burial sites for workers. And that's another kind of very rich area. Now, you're not going to find gold masks there, but you are going to find a wealth of information about how people lived, what was important to them. So there is still stuff to be found, and they are finding tons of stuff in the Valley of the Nobles.
Was the average worker mummified? Did they do all that stuff?
It really depended on their level. So the lowest level, no. But, certainly the people in the Valley of the Nobles, they were mummified, yeah. Mm-hmm. And some of them were very wealthy and buried with great goods, but they often also had really interesting hieroglyphics on their walls. There were things about their lives, So in the past, Egyptian archaeology was focused on, because of partage and the way in which archaeology was conducted, it was all about what costly items can we find. Now it's more focused on scholarship, but there's a huge focus in underwater archaeology. In Alexandria, in the north of Egypt, the famous Library of Alexandria, they're finding whole cities underground, or under the water on the coastline, because the shoreline has changed, it has receded.
Wow.
So that's a really ripe area for the future.
Fascinating.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
In another life.
I think we have time for another question or two.
These statues and obelisks and things that were defaced to erase.
I'm sorry, could you put up your hand, whoever's talking? Oh, okay, thank you. Got it.
These statues, obelisks, monuments, things that had Hatshepsut on them that were defaced and erased. Are they being reattributed to her now?
Oh, yes, yeah.
And are they trying to come up with some sort of a rendering of what it might have looked at before it got hacked away?
Yes and yes.
Oh, good.
So she's really been rewritten back in. People know, for example, that what she built, and for example, there's an incredible structure in the Karnak Temple complex in Luxor called the Red Chapel, and it was this beautiful red stone chapel that she built there, and almost every part of the wall had carved reliefs about her life and her legacy and her divinity and all this stuff. And it was literally obliterated, like shards crumbled on the ground. And I'm trying to remember the exact year, but more recently, it was reassembled, right? And of course, not every relief has been reassembled. A lot of those things were reused for other building purposes. Somebody in their house in Egypt probably has like a Hatshepsut relief on one of their stones, on one of their walls. But in any event, so, there's great effort being made to reattribute the things that were falsely attributed and write her back in while not defacing currently existing structures. Absolutely.
One more question.
Okay, great.
And after the question, Alyssa's going to go on stage and take a group photo of everyone holding up their books with Marie and Deborah on stage. So just
with
stay
Deborah and
seated.
I.
Yes.
Okay, great. Don't move.
Don't get out of your chair yet.
Hi. I have two questions. The first question I have is, how long does it usually take you to write a book like this? And number two, are you familiar with Catherine Martinez and Bob Ballard's discovery?
Say that one more time. I lost.
Are you familiar with Catherine Martinez and Bob Ballard's discovery of Cleopatra?
If you told me what it was, maybe. Offhand, I don't know.
Oh, it was Bob Ballard is one of my patients. He's a friend of mine, and he is trying to find Cleopatra. And
I love him.
And he coupled with Catherine Martinez, who I'm not really sure where she's from, but she's a lawyer. And she's an archaeologist, and
she's like me. She wants something else.
Yes, and that's why it struck me. I was just wondering if you were familiar with it.
I'm not, but maybe I need to meet them.
Yeah, it's on the Discovery Channel. It's called Cleopatra's, The Secret of Cleopatra, and she actually, with Bob Ballard, finds the hidden underneath the ocean. So he helped her with the ocean discovery, and she was on land. It's a great, great.
Oh, I'm gonna have to watch that.
Yeah,
and maybe meet them.
Yeah, you should. He's in Old Lyme.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I got you. Well, you had another question.
How long does it take how long does it take you to write a book?
It's so hard to say because, as I mentioned to Deborah, like some of these people I've been really researching for like a really long time, and most of the women I write about, they've been on my list for a while, so I've been like slowly gathering. Like with Hatshepsut, it's been decades that I've been gathering information about her, maybe 30 years, maybe 30 years, But once I actually decide to write about that particular woman, I would say about a year from when I've, and everything is done in like committee. So once my publisher and I decide that that's okay for me to write about, it's about a year till I turn in my first draft. I mean, you're still working on it, many drafts after that.
Oh, yes.
It's never done. You think it's done, but, it's not done. But from really about a year from when I'm really just focused on writing it till when I turn in that first draft. Yeah. Yeah, but that doesn't count like all the years I've been, a lot of it's percolation, Is that really even a word? I don't know. Percolating.
Well, I think there is an unquantifiable factor of time where ideas come. I think it requires sometimes time for things to synthesize, to surface. Yeah.
And sometimes it's about, something will click or something will connect to you or something will, like finding Evelyn Herbert, like a whole chapter opened up in the way I was going to frame this, that I hadn't even really thought about. When I've been thinking about Hatshepsut in isolation. So, yeah, I mean, you can't, it's hard to put a timeline on when like that creative moment will come that will spark you to really write that book, I would say.
Well, we are so glad it came with Daughter of Egypt.
Thank you so much for being here with me. Thank you for coming out. Thank you to United Theater and Martin's Books. You guys are fabulous.
Thank you for joining us for this special broadcast of the Ocean House Author Series with Deborah Goodrich Royce. Please tune in each month as we'll bring you a new Ocean House Author Series highlighting nationally best-selling and award-winning authors in a salon-style conversation. Hosted by Ocean House owner, actress, and best-selling author Deborah Goodrich Royce. WCRI is pleased to be partnering with the Ocean House to bring you this ongoing series highlighting the best and brightest of the literary world. Thank you once again for joining us. And in the words of Margaret Atwood, in the end, we all become stories.